Welcome to the East Asia by Rhoads Murphy Chapter Summary Podcast at the Historian's Eye. Please subscribe, and if you'd like to be notified when new episodes appear, click the bell icon. Chapter 4, Qin and Han, The Making of an Empire. The Rise of the Qin Dynasty. The rise of the Qin to power in 221 BCE marks an important turning point in Chinese history. It is the event that marks a departure from ancient feudal China and the beginnings of the imperial dynastic system that lasts 2132 years, until the fall of the Qing in 1911. The Qin success is due in part to a line of able rulers firmly rooted in the Hui Valley, what may be called parsimony, or emphasizing the importance of frugality, hard work, and discipline. Qin was one of the smallest, poorest, and remote Zhou dependencies. Its outward appearance suggested it was not a contender among the warring states, despite its military society and position as the guardians of the frontier. However, it succeeded in making strengths out of its weaknesses. A reliable source of agricultural products was built through irrigation and improved distribution systems. Its remote location allowed it to escape much of the warfare that drained the resources of the other states. Qin and legalism. The Qin governed in an authoritarian manner, evident in its adoption of legalism, which encouraged the promotion of state policy along totalitarian lines. The proponents of legalism claimed to be followers of Chunzi and his pessimistic views on nature. They were also most likely influenced by Mozi's utilitarian outlook. The essays of Han Dynasty, who died in 233 BCE, provide the main text for legalism. The main concept of legalism is that strength is found in unity, but that unity can only be created and maintained by government. Severe laws and harsh punishments were promoted as the only way to establish order. The ruler had the right and responsibility to decide what was best for his people, since humans were innately selfish and could not be trusted without governance. At the same time, rulings appeared to have been even-handed. Learning was not considered the path to official appointment. Instead, proven ability was privileged. The Qin dominated by 221 BCE, after the overthrow of the Qi. The Chu, Yan, and Qi were the last to fall in 223 to 221 BCE. The king of the Qin declared himself, quote, the first august emperor of the Qin Dynasty, end quote, or Qin Shi Huangdi. From this point on, Chinese rulers take the title of emperor, Di, over the previously used title of king, Wang. Further conquests include areas in the south, including northern Vietnam. By 221 BCE, most of modern North and South China were under the Qin. Important dynastic developments occurred during the Qin reign. Most of these new systems are continued by subsequent dynasties. Primogeniture, or the inheritance of land by the oldest son, was abolished. Private ownership of land and taxation of that land became an important aspect of the dynasty. The empire was divided into 36 commanderies and subdivided into administrative counties called zhan. A single law code, currency, system of weights and measures, and writing system were imposed. Public works projects, as the imperial system of roads and canals developed, as a result of available labor that could be freed from farming. The most notable of the public works projects was the construction of the Great Wall. Emperor Qin Shi Huangdi ordered the joining together of a series of smaller, earlier walls built along the steppe border. The primary objective was to protect cities from barbarian attack, but it was never really effective, so it became an important symbolic affirmation of empire. The Lishan necropolis, a massive tomb complex, was another major project. Qin Authoritarianism. The Qin was an anti-intellectual empire, which included book burnings and mass extermination of intellectuals. The first emperor was particularly active in destroying books and persecuting intellectuals. His actions led later to condemnation. Prime Minister Li Zi was in fact responsible for much of the assault on intellectuals. The Qin had an expanded state bureaucracy and a rigidly supervised education system that focused only on the practical. Practical skills were given priority over thoughtful inquiry. The government developed a police system, including a secret service whose goal was to discover and punish dissidents. Travel was also strictly monitored. There are obviously parallels to the Cultural Revolution in the 1960s. In spite of the harshness of this period, Qin rule had the appeal of providing change to a perceived failure of the earlier dynasty. One of those changes was meritocracy, which presented a break from leadership based on birth. Order was also restored, and there were a number of public works projects. Despite the authoritarian design, long-lasting positive projects occurred during the reign. Li Bing, an appointed provincial governor and hydraulic engineer, is still honored for his contribution to technological advances in irrigation, particularly on the Yellow River. The Han Dynasty. Upon the death of Qin Shi Huangdi in 210 BCE, Li Zi and others set his choice of successor aside. The upper class withdrew support, and army commanders deserted, leading to the arrest of Li Zi in 208 BCE. Rival groups fought for power. Facing a penalty of death for letting workers escape from the construction of Qin Shi Huangdi's tomb, Liu Bang, who would later take the title Han Gaozu, rebelled and emerged as the first Han emperor in 202 BCE. Under Han rule, China took the geographical boundaries, political design, and cultural shape that more or less still exist today. For example, modern Chinese refer to themselves as the people of Han, distinguish them from the steppe population, other foreigners, and domestic minorities. The success of the Han Dynasty was largely dependent on well-organized government bureaucracy developed by the Qin. But in reaction to the Qin, Liu Bang promoted a Confucian concept of governance, and the harsher aspects of Qin legalist approach were abandoned. Under the new approach, government took on the role of serving its people. Unjust rulers were viewed as having forfeited the mandate of heaven and support of those ruled. Several changes were made to the government structure. First, the controls on travel, education, and thought were abolished. Taxes were lowered. Learning was encouraged for the purpose of creating well-educated state officials. But key elements of the Qin administration were adopted. Conscription for army and labor on public works, as well as administrative division of the empire into counties under the control of an imperial magistrate. The earlier Han period was prosperous and people were enthusiastic about the new order. Leadership succeeded in maintaining administrative control over a large geographical area, previously consisting of separate, distinct communities. Han expansion under Han Wudi. Empress Lu, wife of Liu Bang, ruled after the death of her husband. Confucian historians who accused her of nepotism have condemned her. However, evidence shows that she was lenient towards the peasantry. This was an appreciated relief of the harsh controlling and punitive actions which still lingered in the social consciousness. By the time Wu Di became emperor, the memories of Qin control had waned. He successfully tightened imperial control. This included removing the lords created by Liu Bang, the establishment of regulations on trade and merchants, and new taxes and controls on salt, iron, and the supply of grain, or the ever-normal granary system. From 111 BCE, Wu Di began a program of conquest. He conquered the Yu Kingdom in the south, which included parts of South China and Vietnam. This area had broken away after the fall of the Qin, and continued to struggle for its own political and cultural independence. The Vietnamese and Cantonese cultures had maintained their distinctiveness. In the north, the dynasty expanded into southern Manchuria and northern Korea, where it set up military colonies that later became agricultural settlements. Manchuria maintained a Chinese settlement on and off throughout history. Northern Korea was placed under Han control until the dynasty collapsed in 220 CE. While Korea remained a tributary state after that time, Vietnam was by turns subjugated by China and then independent. Mountain nomads consistently harassed the northern and northwest frontier areas. Beginning with the Zhou, the Silk Road became a major trade route from China through Central Asia and on to Rome. Silk, the main export along the trade route, and a Chinese monopoly since Longshan times, was highly prized by the Romans and contributed greatly to the economic success of China. The most serious threat came from the Xiongnu, who were most likely Turkic. Their mobility made it difficult for Han generals to overcome their attacks. Through a series of military campaigns, Wu Di defeated the Xiongnu and built military colonies and garrisons along the Silk Road in order to control the route. These groups, and the later Uyghurs, remained on the fringes of Chinese territory. China and Rome. Wu Di sent Zhang Qian as an emissary to investigate the West in 139 BCE. Zhang Qian brought back information including the first reports about a distant empire, the destination for silk, which is being sent west. Central Asian groups like the Parthians of Persia profited by playing the role of middlemen between China and Rome along the Silk Road. These groups were never conquered by Rome or China, so the two empires never had direct contact. Historical documents reveal that playing this role was so important to Central Asia that travelers from China and Rome, once arriving there via the Silk Road, were successfully discouraged from continuing the voyage. Imperial censors who established their power as watchdogs opposed Wu Di's conquest. After Wu Di, pressure against the Xiongnu was maintained. In 42 BCE, a coalition under Xiongnu was defeated. Wider trade patterns. Trade across Eurasia played an important part to the development of civilization, starting with the prehistoric era. But it was slow and difficult, in part because of the hostility between different cultural groups. Trade with East Asia occurred along the Silk Road and also by sea. There is evidence to support trade relations between China and India into Western Asia, Greece, and Rome. No direct contact between East Asia and the West until the time of Marco Polo in the 13th century. By the 11th century, the majority of Chinese exports traveled by sea route through India. Little is known of the imports that may have resulted from this trade. Han culture. In reaction to the intellectual persecution of the Qin, there was an important revival of the arts and culture. The use of paper was introduced from the 1st century CE as part of this revival. Liu Bang emphasized education and ability. This included a renewed Confucian emphasis on education and led to the establishment of civil service exams by Liu Bang. Passing became a prerequisite for holding public office and obtaining gentry status. Wealthy families maintained an advantage, often hiring private tutors, but people with little means now had an important opportunity for advancement through working hard and obtaining an education. This was an important shift since gentry status could no longer be inherited, and subsequent dynasties continued to elaborate on the examination system. There were roughly 30,000 Han officials by the 1st century BCE. The majority lived and worked in the imperial capital and provincial capitals. The rest made up the imperial magistrate of each Xian city. People lived beyond the boundaries of such cities were basically left alone to manage their own affairs, as long as they paid taxes, provided labor for public works, and completed their military service. Under the governance of Wu Di, Confucianism became the official state philosophy. Wu Di was himself a patron of Confucian scholarship. The new bureaucracy had a large proportion of Confucian scholars. Confucian scholars of the time, notably Dong Zhou, are known for incorporating aspects of other schools of thought like Taoism and encouraging government policy in favor of making life easier for the lower classes. The Han Prime Minister Wang Mang staged a bloodless coup against Wu Di and established a short-lived Qin Dynasty, which lasted roughly from 9 to 23 CE. His reforms alienated the rich and powerful, and he was murdered by a newly formed rebel group known as the Red Eyebrows. Landed families continued to have a great amount of political power despite the abolishment of primogeniture, a source of strain to the Han and subsequent dynasties. The power of wealthy landowners rivaled that of the state. Peasants were often poorly treated, sometimes to the point of rebellion. This and future dynasties attempted to correct these problems. Han rule was established at the new capital of Luoyang in 25 CE. This period is referred to as the Eastern or later Han Dynasty. China prospered and flourished during this period as it had under the Western or former Han rule from Chang'an. Peace was achieved along the frontiers. A victory over the Xiongnu in 89 CE was probably responsible for the group's migration westward. A series of weak emperors led to a general struggle for power among imperial relatives, powerful families, generals, and eunuchs. In 220 CE, the emperor abdicated. Han rule achieved secure borders temporarily. Factionalism and self-indulgence of the Han Dynasty brought about internal collapse. Cities in ancient China. The Longshan and Shang capitals functioned mainly as places of ceremony and as symbols of royal authority. The cities were massively walled and gated, enclosing royal palaces and residences for priests, slaves, kept artisans, and military guards. The rest of the population lived outside the walls in unplanned village settlements. The cities were constructed from wood, but by the late Shang, the Chinese character and spoken word for city was also the character used for the word wall. By the Zhou Dynasty, some documentation of city planning is available, including the information regarding north-south orientation and presence of temple for glorifying and appeasing heaven or a supreme deity. The western Han capital of Chang'an was carefully planned, including a wall, gates, division into wards, broad streets, and market areas both within and outside its walled boundary. As the city developed, less planned areas emerged with smaller streets and alleys. The ideal city plan was a square with gates on all four sides, one acting as the main gate. These gates were flanked by two lesser gates. The far-flung Han territory was largely organized and controlled through these cities. Walled cities and county seats became the centers of governance, especially in newly conquered regions. They also acted as important visual symbols of empire. Garrison towns and fortresses were often developed in the county seat of a magistrate. The spread of Han power can be traced in the appearance of these towns. Han achievements. China had already developed into a technologically advanced civilization by the time of the Han Dynasty. Under Han rule, important innovations in agriculture, technology, and the production of goods occurred. Some of those advances included porcelain, water-powered mills, lacquer, which was developed under the Zhou, took on its finished appearance during the Han Dynasty. Building of multiple mast ships and the use of a compass, the production of steel, and the development of the suspension bridge. The greatest literary achievements of the Han Dynasty was the writing of history, revealing an emphasis on preserving the past. Han scholars, on a level unequaled in the West, reconstructed historical records destroyed by Qin Shi until the 18th century. Sima Qian, a 1st century BCE scholar known as the Grand Historian of China, compiled the records of the Grand Historian. Ban Gu, also a 1st century BCE scholar, compiled the history of the Han Dynasty. Ban Zhou, sister of Ban Gu, wrote admonitions for women. Both Han China and the Roman Empire reached a sophistication that was greatly respected by later China and Europe respectively. Pressure on the environment. China experienced massive population growth. By Han times, the population was most likely 80 million. This growing population was supported by agricultural development, the building of cities with wood, and the use of wood for fuel. These efforts led to the massive deforestation of China. The problem had already been noted by Mencius. Deforestation had led to erosion and flooding. The Yellow River in particular had been surrounded by dikes to control flooding, with the result that the river is higher than the surrounding lands, and floods occurred throughout broken dikes. Combined with royal hunting, deforestation led to the extinction of animals. Scholars argue that because China supported such a large population, it altered its landscape more than any other civilization. A large number of extinctions were also likely. For example, rhinos and elephants lived in Han times. The South had changed more than the North.